Well, this is the second week of October here in southern New England, and the colors are right on schedule this year. Matter of fact, maybe even just a tad bit early on these red maples here along the Pawcatuck River. I explored this stretch of river upstream from here back in early August when everything was still green, but very little water coming down the river that week. We'd been through several months of droughts, extreme droughts, in early to midsummer, but Mother Nature evened things out quite a bit in September. We had over 10 inches of rain in many areas, and there's a fair amount of water coming down the Pawcatuck River here. We're looking at the Potter Hill Dam here. Probably isn't more than 7 or 8 feet of loss in elevation here, and Potter Hill, not Potter Mill. And there is an old mill downstream from here. It's covered in vines and hard to see. But just like every other river in southern New England, the Pawcatuck was put to work in many different places. But large pools of water behind this dam. I think we can paddle up a good 5 or 6 miles today on flat water and then turn around and come back. We're going to try at least. I had success doing that at the Bradford Dam, 10 miles upstream from here. Probably not even 10 miles, about 8 miles, linear miles upstream from here back in August. I paddled up with not much current and came right back down. So we're going to try that on this stretch of river. Underneath Highway 3 up towards what's called Riverwood Reserve, which has hiking trails you might explore as well. Got about 5.5 hours to do the trip today. We'll see how far we get, and one thing I think we can guarantee today is some nice fall color to observe along the way. And there is roadside parking in the area of this Flora Wheatley Preserve. And we're going to put in just above the Potter Hill Dam here, folks. This is public access here, but not a lot of public parking, but there is roadside parking on the other side of the bridge here. Not much on this side. My boat's a little heavy to be carrying long distances, so I pulled over here, unloaded it, and then found a parking spot across the river here. We've got a nice little slot here for launching. And there is a dam just underneath this bridge to my left, so we're going to paddle upstream to our right. A little bit of a wind coming from the south right now, so I'll make sure it doesn't push me too close to that dam and get into some flat water. And I had no trouble paddling into the wind. It wasn't terribly gusty today, and getting well upstream of that Potter Hill Dam without any risk of going over it at this water level. I wrote down the CFS on the 2 gauges above here. There's the Wood River gauge and the Pawcatuck River gauge above where the 2 rivers meet. And that's an accurate amount of water as to what's coming down here. An accurate estimate. There is a gauge below here, but it's affected by the tides. So it reads much higher twice a day for that reason. I've got that all written down. I've got the piece of paper, and I'm neglected to bring it with me today with the map and the gauge readings, but we'll look at those at the end of this trip. Meanwhile, we started at Potter Mill Road, which is just maybe 8 or 9 miles upriver from downtown Westerly, where the Pawcatuck River empties into Little Narragansett Bay. And we're about 8 or 9 miles downstream from where we took the trip in August, up towards the Burlingame State Park campsite. But boy, look at these red maples. I decided to make this trip this weekend because I knew I had the color on the red maples this early, and also the black gums. And I recall seeing a lot of black gum along this river upstream from here, so we'll see if that holds true on this stretch as well. But the red maples alone, including this gold colored one, are making this well worth the effort to paddle upstream without much current here. This is pretty much still water at this water level. I think the 2 gauges combined were reading about 90 CFS. But above this dam, at least for a few miles, from what I can tell on the satellite view, there is no current at this water level. just a little bit of a headwind at times. But this river bends and curves enough and is narrow enough. I don't think the headwind is going to be a big issue. The forecast was not for a lot of wind today, but anytime the sun comes out in the fall, the air mixes down and you get more wind sometimes than they were expecting. And this gray birch here, not quite as vivid as those red maples we just looked at, but it is overhanging the water. As I mentioned on my trip in August, for those that watched it or will watch it, gray birches is one of the trees that's always seeking out sun, and it will grow sideways to do that. So this tree is hanging over the river, but not because it got undercut necessarily. It might have, but to seek out sun and avoid the shade of the larger trees above it. So saw quite a bit, an occasional gray birch on the trip in August, and would expect occasional gray birches along here as well. They're only really common or densely populated in areas that have been recently cleared, where it's wide open for the gray birches to take over. But in areas where the woods have been around a while, they find these little openings and hang around and grow sideways on rock cliffs and along rivers and along ponds. And there's that arrowhead shaped leaf, which is distinctly different than the other three birches that grow in this area: the paper birch, the yellow birch, and the black birch. And we've probably come about 2 miles upriver. Aside from the headwind at times, there has been no current. So the Potter Hill Dam does create a pool here, and at this water level there isn't much downstream flow that I could notice. And this river does change direction enough and is narrow enough you can hide from the worst of the wind. Got a little stretch there where it was fighting me pretty good for about 10 minutes, but got through it, and now we're in a little eddy here with not much current and not much wind. And I did a recording on the fall and summer foliage of black gum a couple weeks ago. Actually, I worked on it all summer and finished it last week when these black gums were first starting to turn. And it's on my Barkin' Up the Right Tree channel. That's BARKIN apostrophe up the right tree. It's called Black Gum Summer and Fall Appearance. And that is a sequel to the winter appearance I did back in January and February on that tree. But here in southeast and southern New England, it's mostly near water. It's in moister soils, along rivers, along these sloughs. I call them sloughs. There's some backwater areas along this river that are like dead-end channels that go back quite a distance. I haven't explored any of them yet, but places where the soil is moist but not completely waterlogged is where you're often finding this black gum. And it goes from yellow to orange to magenta to dark maroon and every shade in between, and it gives these red maples a good run for their money as far as fall colors go. I think there's probably more red maple along this river than black gum. So we'll enjoy this fall foliage as we go. It's a nice day. It's in the 60s. The sun's playing hide and seek, and we got plenty of time to explore this river. I've made pretty good progress so far. I might be able to get up at least 4 or 5 miles before the turnaround time. And trying to get a sneak up on this guy here. Did pretty good sneaking up on that turtle, but I unfortunately bumped into the log while holding this camera. And I don't know if that was a painted turtle. He didn't quite look like one. I think we got a good enough look at him. I can review this video and identify him later, and then type that in above the image of that turtle on that segment of video. So It was frosty the last couple mornings. The low at the airport here in Westerly, Rhode Island was in the 30s last night. So these guys come up to warm up, and they're about done their basking season. Unless we get some Indian summer the second half of October, they're thinking about packing it in for the winter, and they can actually live in the underwater, even though they breathe air. They have a way of getting water through their cloaca in the winter time, or excuse me, getting air or oxygen through their cloaca in the winter time, and don't have to be above ground where it's well below freezing much of the winter. So reptiles are amazing animals. They all have to devise ways of keeping from freezing to death at these northern latitudes. And it's amazing how far north they can make a living, but eventually if you get up into the central and northern Canada, you don't find any reptiles or amphibians. Seen several of those turtles today, and again, I'm not sure they're painted or not. We'll take a look at the guidebooks when we get home and see if we can positively identify them. But they're out here. It's trying to be warm today. When the sun's out, it feels warm, and when it clouds over, it feels a little bit more like fall. Meanwhile, I believe that's high bush blueberry in the background there. And that's a plant that often challenges the maples and the black gum as far as how pretty the colors are, and they can get 8 to 10 feet high, hence the name high bush blueberry. And we're on a stretch of river where the wind doesn't seem to be affecting the stillness of the water and the reflection of these trees. It's just shown in that last video there. Incredible color. This is a plant we looked at when I did the trip in August, and it was just starting to get the berries, but they were still green. And boy, this is an amazing plant. I think it looks even neater once these deciduous winterberry holly leaves have fallen to the ground, because the winter berries, or these red holly berries, stick around well into the winter, but not to the spring. Usually by February they're gone, but between Thanksgiving and Christmas and the first of the year, when these fairly small deciduous leaves have dropped to the ground, you have these naked branches covered in thousands of these pea-sized holly berries. And amazing. It's very common in the wetlands and along streams in southeast New England and southern New England. There's another plant that grows in moist soils called spice bush, which has a similarly sized leaf, but it doesn't have the jagged edge that this winterberry holly has. And the berries on those are bright red, but they are more oval shaped and not perfectly round like the berries on this winterberry holly. Seen quite a bit of it today. Wasn't always in a good spot to pull over and record it, but there's plenty of it to be seen along this stretch of the Pawcatuck River, which, as I expected, is still water. And occasional summer homes from the Potter Hill Road upstream, about a mile from the Route 3 bridge. And then we're getting into a stretch here where there are no roads nearby. And from what I can tell, there are no houses along this next stretch for about 4 or 5 more miles. We can't go quite that far today. I'm going to go about another mile and a half, and then probably start heading back. And I'm at a good turnaround point here. I've come about 2 or 3 miles upstream from the Rhode Island Route 3 bridge. And there's many places along this stretch of river and down by the put-in at Potter Hill Bridge where there's lagoons that come off the main channel, and they go back quite a distance sometimes. I chose this lagoon here just so I knew I wouldn't get blown around too much while I'm trying to eat my lunch. But these are old channels of the river. I'm sure at very high water levels, the river recaptures them and water pushes through them, but that probably wouldn't be the kind of conditions you want to be paddling in anyways at high water, especially if you're going to do an upstream paddle. But I'd say less than 2 hours up to here. We're right across from the tail end of the Riverwood Preserve. We've been following that on the south side of this stream for quite a distance. Has many trails, many rock outcrops, and old granite quarries to explore. I'm going to stick with the river today just because that's where the best leaf peeping is, or the best colors are right now. The scarlet oaks up on the Riverwood Preserve would be in full color in a few weeks here, but they're usually still green this early in the fall. We're going to turn around and start heading back downstream and record some more of these black gums and other incredible trees as we find them. And put the wraps on this one. When I get back to the home base there, I can actually get out the map that I forgot to bring and chart our course. But definitely, if you have the time to paddle more than I did today, I had 5 hours available today. If you had time to do a whole day out here and come upstream from Potter Hill or downstream from Bradford, this middle stretch here has no houses, is full of wildlife, all kinds of lagoons to explore, and just a neat place to really appreciate what's available as far as the natural world in this part of southern New England. And boy, what was broken overcast with some peaks of sun a few hours ago has become completely blue skies. So our downstream paddle, which, you know, even though there isn't much current, it's definitely easier, has created a whole different view of this river just because of the way the lighting changed. And these maples, that may even be a sugar maple right there. There's a pretty steep bluff right here that might have well-drained soil that a sugar maple could thrive in. And there's even been a few silver maples along this floodplain. And silver maple, I didn't see any on the last trip on this river. It's not that common around here on this river. But it is a floodplain tree. But you know what? I'll trade the red maples for the sugar or silver maple any day, because the red maples have incredible fall colors. And silver maple, it might get a little yellow, but it's just not as pretty. But that's what we got here. We're going to keep paddling down. We're almost back down to the Route 3 bridge. There's a few lagoons that I passed over on the way up just so that I could get the distance I wanted. I think we might have time to explore a few of those in what's turned out to be a bluebird afternoon. Did have a wind shift. It was a south wind earlier. It's a west wind now, but not enough to really slow me down. It just kind of makes it a little hard to make videos and paddle at the same time because I'm getting twisted around by the wind. But that's part of paddling, and boy, you know, it's a whole different view on the way back because of the change in direction and the change in the lighting here. And as we drift on down below the Route 3 bridge, you got a little gentle current here, but pretty much still water the whole way. This is a little constricted here, so the water is flowing. There's a concrete foundation of probably the most recent bridge. And then the current bridge is right above us with these beautiful arches. And then, really neat, is this, I think these stones may have been roughly quarried, but they're not real smooth. And there's no mortar, and they're still there after all the floods and ice jams that happen on rivers like this. So this is a much older foundation for a bridge. across the Pawcatuck River here. And beautiful fall colors right here. That golden color you're seeing there is not a tree. That's poison ivy vines. And they can get incredible colors too. They can get crimson, they can get red, they can turn gold. And obviously you wouldn't want to get anywhere near this in the summertime. So we're about halfway back. We're going to keep exploring as time allows. I got a little bit over an hour to do the last couple miles, so I think we'll have time to explore some of those lagoons that I passed over on the way up earlier today. Got one more glimpse of our winterberry holly as we drift on by. You sure can tell it's mid-fall here by the angle of the sun. It's not going to go down for another hour and a half, but it's already really low in the sky. And there's all kinds of little and big lagoons back here. I'm just exploring a few of them right now. I'm sure these would be chock full of pickerel weed. There's still some left, the leaves, and other flowering plants like I found on my August trip. So very scenic back here, and boy, this really turned out to be pretty with this blue sky. I'll try to record a couple more of these lagoons. There's quite a few wood ducks hanging out back here, but they usually fly away before I can get the camera out. And one of the larger lagoons, or sloughs, I think they call these when you get to the Mississippi River area. Mississippi River is known for changing its course, especially the lower part. So there's all these lakes that are old channels. And that's the case with this Pawcatuck River too. There's many places where that's happened. Some of them have filled in with vegetation and they're marshes. You can't paddle up them, but they show up on the satellite views between here and Bradford and beyond, all the way up to Wood River Junction and probably beyond that. So these are accessible, but they don't have an upstream outlet. You can come up them, but you cannot continue upstream. You cannot approach them as you come downstream until you pass them and then come back up. But there's probably 4 or 5 of them along here. I'm not going to have time to do them all. But certainly a way to make a canoe trip even longer and with more to see without having to set up a shuttle. You know, I'm doing all this without taking the time to set up a shuttle. I'm still seeing all kinds of neat stuff back here, and I can concentrate on canoeing and making videos and not getting the shuttle taken care of. So this is a great place to paddle if you don't want to do that and you just want to see what there is to see. These 2 sections of river that I've put on this channel on the Pawcatuck both allow for that. And after almost 5 hours on the river here, we'll replot our course on the map in just a minute here. I'm estimating right now we went up at least 4 miles, probably 5. If you're going to take this stretch of river from Bradford down, which is where the nearest boat launch is Bradford. There's other places you could sneak onto the river. This is considered an official launch here, and it's very easy to miss. I knew it was here because I put in here. But if you see this bridge, the Potter Hill Bridge, you better be on the left-hand bank, folks, because the dam is right up here. You can hear it. And anytime you see the horizon drop off, that will strike fear into any paddler, because you know what that means, waterfall or a dam. They got a little warning sign on the other side of this support for the bridge. It's not that big. you're paddling down here, you need to exit here. This is a deadly low head dam. It's not that low, but it has a terrible undercurrent. People have died here. Your exit is this little slot right here to the park where I started. So I'm glad I started here, because I'm not sure if I would have seen that little slot river left as I was coming down, but I would have been looking for it, so I probably would have. So just a word of warning here. This is not a place where you want to let your guard down. The Bradford Dam, unlike this one, has several small chutes that can be run by skilled paddlers, but this one is unrunnable for anybody. We'll take a look at that map and plot our course, try to estimate my mileage, and probably going to put the paddle away for the winter. I'm running out of good weekends to try to do this, or weekdays to try to do this type of sport. November usually just doesn't allow for that, unless you are into wetsuits and getting cold, and I'm going to put the hiking boots on in November instead. I got some hikes planned. I got some that I'd like to try to do. We'll see what Mother Nature allows. But this was definitely a great afternoon trip, and I'd like to come back here and do more of it when I've got a little bit more time to do so. And we've got the canoe back off the truck here and kind of up on some sawhorses for the winter. I found with canoes, if you leave them on the ground, when you go to pick it up in the spring, sometimes there's stuff making itself at home, including bees. So I try to keep it off the ground. I also had a problem with the gunnels on this canoe rotting away. When I first bought it, I had to replace them with treated lumber, and they've been good ever since. So the original gunnels were ash. Looked real nice, but certainly not rot resistant. Okay, so here's what we did. I just scaled it off with a string. We got the scale on this map here. This map is produced by the Pawcatuck Watershed Association. It has its own mileage markers. I went ahead and used their scale and scaled off what I did. And with a piece of string, putting in at the Florence Whiteley Preserve, where Potter Hill Road crosses the Pawcatuck River, and there's a dam just downstream from that, as I showed. Zigzagged my way all the way down underneath Rhode Island Highway 3, which is the dark black line. And shortly after that, we lost the summer home development and entered the south side of the preserve was the Riverwood, or south side of the river was the Riverwood Preserve, and turned around right about where that property ends, for where this next meander is. I put a little dot there. That scaled off to 5.5 miles. So about a 10 to 11 mile float. Took me about 5 hours with some time to stop and smell the roses. And this Wood River Pawcatuck Association has the information on this entire stretch of river, including where I went in August and many other sections of both the Wood and Pawcatuck rivers. Pawcatuck River, at just above Wood River Junction that day, was reading 47 CFS, or 1.98 feet on that gauge. The Wood River itself had 32 CFS coming downstream and 1.89 feet on that gauge. So what we had combined was 79 cubic feet per second on October 10th, 2022. I'm going to just show on the Google map, the satellite view, some of the little lagoons that are there for your exploration. You can clearly see them. Center of the screen is the Potter Hill Road where we started. We went down the map. We're southbound. There's several lagoons that went off the main channel, but you have to approach them from the downriver side. And I've got the Riverwood Preserve trails downloaded onto Google Maps. The Westerly Land Trust will allow you to do that. If you visit their website, all their preserves have trails that are downloadable onto your phone or your tablet. I turned around just about where the R in Pawcatuck River is there and headed back west or south northwest. But many more meanders upstream from there I didn't have time to explore, with almost no development along the banks of the river. There's another park up here called the Grillis Preserve where I've hiked. It's undeveloped now, but there was industrial facilities there at the time, not in the not too distant past. And just upstream from there is the Bradford, Rhode Island, where there's another dam, and it was upstream of there where I explored in early August. My plan is to keep the boat in store up on sawhorses for the winter, unless we get some real good Indian summer weather and I have the time to get out again. And we'll start exploring these waterways again in May or June of 2023.